evening, everyone. The others will be joining us as we continue forward. After the budget yesterday, early childhood education could not be, I think we would all agree, a more topical subject. On our panel tonight is one of Canada's greatest advocates of early childhood education. Margaret McCain needs no introduction from me. She was the first woman to serve as the Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick. As chairman of the Margaret and Wallace McCain Family Foundation, Margie has worked tirelessly in the belief that nothing can matter more to Canada's competitive future than to improve early childhood learning. Anne Sado balances Margie's viewpoint perfectly. Anne is president of George Brown College. She observes daily the results and deficiencies of Canada's educational system. She's well equipped to comment on what happens when Canada's children become adults and go to university. Anne's career area of focus is the development of future Canadian workforce with the right balance of skills for the knowledge economy. Our third member of the panel, Deanna Burke, is unable to be here with us this evening. She was admitted to St. Mike's Hospital to have extensive tests done, and we wish her a full and speedy recovery. Gail Hunter, a member of her board of PACE Canada, is here on this call, however, and perhaps we might hear from her. Our moderator this evening has dedicated what is a stellar career to public service. Laura Broughton started off clerking to a Supreme Court of Canada justice. You have to be really bright to do that. She rose to become minister of several important departments in Ontario government, including Minister of Education. Her last post, and perhaps most relevant to this discussion, was Minister of Children and Youth Services. As such, she effectively led the national push in Canada for early childhood education. Currently, Lauren is president and CEO of Nova Scotia Business Inc., that province's economic development agency. I could not imagine of a more able person to lead this important discussion and conversation. Over to you, and thank you for being here, Laurel.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be joining all of you this evening and to reconnect with so many familiar names and faces. Now I'm seeing the names on the screen and seeing some faces across the top. You're absolutely right. We could not be having this conversation in a better week. If we were all together in the tradition of Verity, we should probably be having a glass of champagne and celebrating, because it has been a big week for childcare. It's been fun for me over the past number of months to reconnect with this really important project, one that I was passionate about and I've always been passionate about through the Prosperity Project, which worked as one of the groups, supporting the lifelong work that Margaret has been doing. So I'm really thrilled to have Anne and Margaret tonight engage in a conversation, and we hope that we'll engage in a conversation with all of you. My suggestion is that you signal by putting your hand up once we finish the opening remarks, and I'll ask some questions, and then we'll hear from you, and we can have this I think what will be a really robust discussion. So Margaret, I know you have been championing this for so many years. We first met on one of your early years studies, and you never let up. So Margaret, let's just jump into, if you're ready, let me know give me a signal when you're good to go. I will just simply say that as someone who is privileged to serve as Minister of Children, has seen the country go through many discussions on this topic, I frankly couldn't be more excited this week, because even though I believed that something important on childcare was going to happen, I really didn't think that it would be this big and that it would be this substantive. So why don't we just start by that, Margaret? How are you feeling right now? And, should we really be celebrating?
Well, the bottom line is, yes, we should be celebrating. I'm over the moon. It was bigger than I expected. never, in fact, it's hard to believe that when you go to government with a shopping list, and not only do they give you the whole shopping list, but they give you a little extra just in case you're hungry, you know? So 23 years I've been involved in this issue, and it started in Ontario with Mike Harris when he was premier, and he was persuaded by Dr. Fraser Mustard to co-chair an early year study, and that was the beginning. He asked me to co-chair it, and that's history. But 23 years ago, and it seems like forever in some ways, and yet all of a sudden it happened overnight. And I said to the minister yesterday, how did it happen so fast? And how come it's so big? But obviously we did a good selling job, and we began, and what really has sold it is, yes, childcare, but the fact that children and women are part of a bigger story about our future social and economic prosperity. So it all of a sudden, it's gone on the radar as an investment in our economic future. That made the big difference. And that's why to get it, we were asking for 8 billion a year, and we're going to get to that after 5. But they decided to go, that was going to take us to the international average. And I think Canada decided the international average is not good enough for Canada. We need to go beyond it. So I'm over the moon.
Yeah.
And surprised too. I didn't expect it, Laura.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's one of the, if we think back about COVID-19 and, something like the Prosperity Project that Mary and so many others of you and myself are involved with, or in early days, we realized we really had to focus on the impact of COVID-19 on women. And then that ultimate with respect to their families. And I certainly saw in my own staff here that I lead, the team that I lead here in Nova Scotia, when daycares were not open in those early dark days of the pandemic, it absolutely was crystal clear how children were not being fulfilled, they were not learning, and families really could not function. So maybe the silver lining of COVID-19 is that we saw how critically important that is for the economy and for our mental health and for future success. So we're going to get into all of those things, but I don't want to underestimate, Margaret, how much of a journey we still have. So the money's being budgeted, the budget has to pass, the bilateral agreements have to be entered into with all the provinces, and we are still, all of us who are on this call, going to have a role in defending to others who might be critical about why do we need this? Why did we need this? So let's spend a few minutes now, Margaret, on why do we need childcare? What is the evidence and the reasoning behind that to arm all of our participants tonight for the next dinner party they get to go to when someone says, why did we need to do that? And I do hope that we get some dinner parties sometime soon.
Well, it is important that we do understand why it is necessary to put 30 billion into what they're calling childcare. So there are 2 parts to the story. There's childcare to get women back to work, and that we all understand that. We all understand what a childcare space looks like, and we're all supportive. And that was the big push in the beginning. And the pandemic just made it even highlighted the need. When 78,000 women were put out of work because they didn't have anybody to stay home look after the kids, all of a sudden we became aware childcare is extremely important. So that's part number 1. But childcare alone is not going to deliver the economic benefits that we need for the future. And that was part 2. And that's where we came in, knowing we know the whole story, but it's a complicated story. It's not an easy story. It's not an easy story to describe, not an easy story to sell. And certainly the federal government was not there. And they confirmed that to me. A year ago, January, it was not on their agenda at all. Possibly childcare, but early learning and care was not there. So last summer with the pandemic, all of a sudden we realized we had to get the bigger story, the larger the whole of society story. And that's what it is. It's a whole of society story with women and children forming the very foundation of our future economic prosperity. Why women and children? Well, women are central to healthy children. We also, the science tells us that those first 6 years are the time when the foundations for learning, for health, for behavior are laid. for your future, they establish your future life trajectory on how well you're going to be prepared for the future. Our economy going down the road is going to be dependent on how well we prepare all, and I stress all our children. We cannot leave any out. We cannot, with the childcare system that we have today, rich kids are going to get good childcare because their parents will pay for it and see that they get it. Middle to low income kids are not getting it. When you leave behind a good chunk of your population, we're losing talent. They're going to become dependent on society to look after them. We have to do a much better job of retrieving the talent from the talent pool of that 50% below the middle income. And that's why universality is critically important to our future social and economic prosperity. Now, I could go on for the rest of the hour, but let's give somebody else a chance to speak.
Sure. No, that's great. Thanks, Margaret. And I was thinking about really the journey, the important, I think, the takeaway from what's happening in this budget is, and that you've always said, Margaret, is it needs to be as if it were school. We would never walk away from saying we don't want to have all children access to education. And I thought about my own sort of my own life. I think it was very valuable that I was a mother of young children when I served both as Minister of Education and Minister of Children and Youth Services. My own twins, who are 15 now, started daycare under 15 months old. And I remember telling them at the time, this is your first day of school. And they went into that daycare, which was in the school system. And that's the school that they continued in their junior kindergarten and in their kindergarten and all through those years. And one of the funny roles that I had inside government was serving as Minister of Children and suggesting that education was really where childcare should be because it was the beginning of our learning. And then becoming Minister of Education and needing to receive that department and integrate it into our early learning and education system. And then going back and carrying both education and childcare at the same time to really get that integration. So I guess it was lucky that people were leaving and there was shuffling and et cetera happening, but it really is part from all purposes for families in their state. They are saying when their children start in the earliest of childcare that it's the beginning of their school years, and we need to treat it like that, nationally, and that's what we're going to see coming out of this. I'm going to bring Ann Sato into the conversation. Ann, the provincial, the federal government documents talk about the dividends of investing in early learning and childcare, and a few of the things that I can pull out of here are improves long-term social and economic outcomes, increases labor force participation rate of women, which Margaret has talked about, boosts economic growth. So let's hone in on what you see in your role at George Brown College at the other end of the spectrum. Why are you such a champion of early learning and childcare and quality childcare?
Thanks, Laurel, and thanks, Margie, for your comments. In fact, as a college who educates early childhood educators, I think we have a really critical role to play in this. And I think, as Margie said, it's not about daycare or childcare. This is about early learning and really establishing the framework and the basis for our young people. We know how quickly they learn and how important that early learning is. So we really need to have qualified early childhood educators who are supporting the system and ECE as we go through it. And those early childhood educators need to be supported by a professional working environment. They need decent compensation. I think that's something that we can advocate for and we can stand up for, given the centers that we run. And for those of you who don't know, well, first of all, early childhood education is one of our longest standing programs at the college. We educate about 1,000, or we have about 1,000 students going through our programs every year. We offer credentials that include diplomas, an early childhood leadership degree. We have continuing education programs, a number of management programs. And also learners can take their program through an apprenticeship model as well. And so we know that we're going to have to increase the supply of those qualified early childhood educators as we move forward. But I think another thing that we're very proud of is the fact that we run what we call lab schools, which are centers where young children are. We have about 1,000 children in our centers, in our lab schools every year. So we support lots of children and lots of families. We have about 150 staff members who support those centers as well. And we know that they contribute to the social fabric of our communities. And we're located in the towers in downtown Toronto, where in communities across the city. I'm particularly proud of the ones where we're co-located with the Toronto District School Board, and we have 7 such locations. We're about to open our 13th in the next couple of years as we build our newest building down by the waterfront. And I think working in close collaboration with the City of Toronto and TDSB has really provided us with a framework that really allows us to move forward. So I think all of those things in supporting the high quality of learning. And I think what Margie said that really resonated with me as well is that that access and that equity lens, that having access to early childhood qualified or high quality early childhood education is so important, because it doesn't matter if you're of a richer group or a not so much. Everyone has access to high quality, just as you do if you're going to the publicly funded school system. And I think that's so critical in order to level the playing field and really help prepare all of our young people, because we're going to be relying on those as we age to support the economy and support us. And so starting off with a really strong foundation, I think, is critical.
Thanks, Anne. As we move to a universal publicly funded system, how do you see sort of, not-for-profit, community-based childcare being able to find a role in this? And it's kind of a question both to you, Anne and Margaret. We want to keep the best of what we've had, and we want to get better. And there will be some work ahead in a universal rollout to make sure that we're able to do that. So do you have any early thoughts on that? I know the budget was only yesterday. We didn't expect this much money, but I'm sure you've thought about that question before.
Is it me? You had just
Margaret, you, and then I'd love to hear from Anne on it as well.
I want to emphasize something that Anne has said. I want to reinforce what she has said. Anne happens to be president of George Brown College, that does have one of the probably the best program in the country. And in fact, our program director was one of her educators. So, but Anne mentioned high quality. There are 5 criteria to the system that we envision that really must be in place. However, it's delivered within the provinces is their prerogative. But there are 5 criteria. One is universality. The next one, it has to be a high quality system. And if anything less than high quality can do more harm than good. So we emphasize high quality. You cannot have a high quality system unless you have a high quality workforce. So I want to reinforce what Anne said. They are providing the high quality education at George Brown College, and that will need to be emulated in many other colleges. They can't deliver them fast enough at this point. But a high quality workforce is essential to an effective system. So let me see now. Now I've forgotten the question. It was back to
how do we keep the best of some of what we have as we move
not for profit,
Yeah.
Not for profit. Each province is going to do it differently, but we have seen it happen in some of our provinces, and they've been invited to migrate into this public system. And usually when that happens, you'll find that their workforce is more respected and better paid, better benefits. And all of a sudden, their status in society is elevated by moving into the public education system. So gradually, we're finding that the not-for-profit sector see it's to their advantage if they migrate into the system. For-profit is a little different. Now, as I say, each province will do it their own way. I see it. I don't believe that our taxpayer dollars should go to any business, for-profit business. So therefore, I see the for-profit childcare functioning within society as the independent schools in society do. They have to meet certain criteria, but we don't pay for them. We don't subsidize them. And they have to pay whatever the market demands. And yes, they'll probably give high quality and charge a lot for it. And there'll be some people that will want to do that. That's their prerogative. So we're not saying it can't be, but they'll have to fit into a system, and then it will be designed within each province as it rolls out.
So, Anne, can I come to you on that question with respect to, you talked about a number of centers that are part of the TDSB. So you've lived a bit this journey in integrating that. So give us what your learnings from that.
Well, I think that the key from my point of view, because I agree with Margie that there's going to be both types of opportunities, the for-profit and not-for-profit. And of course, we operate in the not-for-profit world. But I think what we have to have is the quality standards and the expectation of what that will be. And I think everyone has to live up to them. And what I would hope and what I would aspire to is that the recognition is there for whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, but certainly the not-for-profit in our environment offers that opportunity for access to so many families who just won't have the option of high quality. Like they might find the daycare, but not the high quality early childhood education. And I think we have to work with government. And I do think this will be a bit of a journey. Because Margie's right, every single province and every single location is in a different place. And so for them to get from where they are now to where we all aspire to go, there's going to be different pathways because they're going to have different issues that they have to cope with. But I think the recognition of the high quality trained early childhood educator and requiring that as part, I know that our early childhood educators have to be licensed as part of the regulatory college. Absolutely requiring that as part of that. And then you can make sure, and I think by showing that the not-for-profit opportunity is equal to in quality, if not greater than a private or for-profit, I think that will elevate the opportunity and will move the support, because you know that it takes the proof of this being able to be done, and then the showing that the quality is there. And I think then the other pieces will follow, and it'll flow from there in a very positive way.
I think that you said a journey. I was going to use the word bumpy. It'll still be a little bumpy, but I think we have some lessons that we've learned across the country in the rollout of all-day junior kindergarten, because we had to think about that rolled out in Ontario, that's rolled out here in Nova Scotia as an example, spreading across the country. We had to look for space. Does the school have space? We had to speak to and understand, what would be the impact on childcare providers, because, we were cognizant that we will probably be taking some of their staff. And so I think there's some lessons that we probably learned in the system as a whole by dealing with 3 and 4-year-olds. And now we're dealing with a little bit younger. There's going to be pieces to that puzzle and a rolling out of how you do it. So, but I think if we keep our eye on what we're all have been championing and are excited about, it'll be worth the bumps. So I'm gonna ask a couple more questions, but I'm gonna signal to the participants that if you want to put your hand up, I can call on you to ask questions. Margaret, back to you. So you've been championing this for such a long time. You now have it in the budget. What did you get up today and say, I need to do? What were you focused on today? Because we know there's still work ahead.
Well, it's been our single mission for our Family Foundation, and to get early childhood education embedded and secure in public policy. Well, I think they just took my job away. So we have to rethink. I'm thinking today, what is our role going to be going forward? Do we have one? And we will not do anything unless it's in concert with government, because if they're going in the direction that we want them to go, in which we want them to go, we're not going to muddle, interfere. We don't need banners. We're here to support them to get where they need to be. I've already spoken to the minister about that. And that's going to be on the table. We're having a foundation meeting tomorrow, but we have several things that we might possibly do. We've had a lot of experience now with many of the provinces. We might be able to act as consultants. That would be Jane Bertrand and Carrie McQuaig, not me, but and Ann Sato knows them. Could act as consultants because they now know all the glitches on the ground. Like one little glitch in Nova Scotia. How do you put 3-year-olds on a school bus
That
with
was
no
a glitch in
monitor
Ontario
and no
too.
seat belts?
Yep.
And they don't know enough to sit in the seat, and they're distracting the driver. So, you know, these are some of the little tiny glitches that are very, very serious,
Yeah.
putting children at risk. So that's
Well,
just one of them.
True enough. I remember, Margaret, when my own two at just over 3 went to full-time school, and the teacher, this was in the very first years of All Day K, realized, because she had not taught that level before, that you actually have to tell them to open their lunch and eat their lunch. Because generally a 3-year-old, they're not going to necessarily do that. So yes, there's all sorts of things that we learn. We have a lot of people that want to ask questions. So if you don't mind, Margaret and Ann, I'm going to start calling on folks. Suzanne Knight, you had a question.
Hi, everyone. So I wanted to give a little bit of context, if that's okay. So I live in the East End of Toronto, and I have 3 kids ages 5 and under. And just so those on the line are aware of the current daycare prices, right now our costs are $3,200 a month for our 3 kids, and they attend a good daycare, but it's run by a nonprofit organization, and it's by no means a ritzy private daycare. So just to give that context. So I have 2 questions. One is, do you think that it really is going to be standard pricing for daycare across the board? Or do you think it will be a subsidized, targeted to income model? And to give a sense, with the current state where many families don't qualify for subsidies, middle-class families, we are still paying $3,200 a month as an example of what this costs. So that's the first. And second, how will, if you know, how will French language programs factor in? So there are nonprofit organization daycares right now that offer programs in French that feed into the Francophone public school system. Do you have a sense of whether there will be English and French options once there is this broader standard public system?
I'll attempt to answer that. What was your name again?
Suzanne.
I'm Suzanne.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms, what we really had hoped for and envisioned, that it would be fully publicly funded. But they're talking about, well, obviously the funding is going, there's a lot of public money that's going to go into the system. No, there will not be an income-based fee schedule. No, there won't be that. What they're talking about is is $10 a day. I haven't had this discussion. This is something new for me. So I can't really speak for the government. However, I sort of think that might be something that will cover the before and after care. Because, if the government pays for the school hours from 9 to 3, that doesn't fit. The system has to fit parents' work hours. And that might be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So there's before and after, and it will be with staff, consistent staff that are already hired by the public system. So I think that's giving people a partnership right across the board. Everybody pays $10 a day. And I guess if those who can't, there will be some kind of subsidization. But now again, I can't speak for government. That's one of the things they're going to have to work out. I thought that it would be fully publicly funded, but anyway, there you go.
So
the other question, let me see the second part of it.
The other thing was about the schools, the French schools.
That will be again within the province, and how they will probably integrate that as they do French immersion, have a French immersion room, perhaps, if that's possible. There are many different ways to look at it, but again, that's within the provinces, and they will do it under their own prerogatives.
I think that those are really good questions, Suzanne, and having served as Minister of Children and Minister of Education, I think that these things will be discussed. I mean, our best understanding right now, Margie says, is bilateral agreements with the provinces. And the language that the government is using is bringing fees for regulated childcare down to $10 per day on average within the next 5 years. So we have some journey to get there, and it won't be flat $10 per day. It's going to be on average $10 per day. So there's, a number of things, but certainly in the French system itself, having my own children in that system and done some of the negotiations with them when we rolled out all-day kindergarten, it is a different model, the French language system, and they do have childcare centers in many of the schools. And so I think that might be something that could be absorbed into the system as part of the system as this rolled out. So, it will remain to be seen. There's a lot of heavy lifting ahead, but good questions. Diane, I'll come to you next.
Thank you. I work in the field of and privately boosting literacy for all ages, whether I'm currently working with someone as old as 77 all the way down to young children. And what I found, particularly through this pandemic, is how important it is for the parents to have more understanding and involvement in their child's education, especially at earliest ages. And so I'm wondering, has there been discussion about how to also support, when we're talking about the bottom half of the income population, has it been considered? And I know we do have the family learning centers and things like that, but has that been factored into a part of the solution? Because I personally find, and the statistics are, that there's very high issues with literacy among a large proportion of the adult population in Canada. And have they thought about any way of supporting the children better by having the parents better supported?
Good question, Diane. Margie, do you want me
I
to
think
go to
Anne
Anne
should.
on that one? Or
I'm going to turn that over to Anne.
perfect. That's what I was thinking too. Anne.
And I'd probably turn it over to one of the early childhood educators that we have on the call who knows these things a lot. I think it's a very valid point, Diane, and I know the work that you're doing, which as you've explained it to me over the years, is absolutely critical and phenomenal. And I think it's actually interesting, I'll digress, and I'm not sure that I'll answer the question. I quite frankly don't think that they've thought that far ahead. I think that this is all so new and so early. I think that's one of the considerations that's going to have to be put on the table. But one of the things, in speaking with Patricia Chorney-Rubin earlier today on just some of the things from the budget, et cetera, and we were talking about how they've had to adapt and change because of the pandemic. And of course, the centers that are in our TDSB locations, because the schools have now been closed, those centers are all closed. We've been able to continue to offer support. So we still have our students placed in those centers. They're working with our early childhood educators, but they're reaching out and they're doing things with families at home. And by involving the families in some of the learning that our children are doing, it's actually engaging them in a different way. And I think that in general, with what we found in post-secondary education with this pandemic, when we had to pivot everything to online learning, we know that there's things that we won't change because there's so much that we've learned on how we can do things differently and support families differently. So I think there might be an opportunity there. I honestly don't think that they've thought that far ahead, but I think there are ways, and just by making this universal and accessible, we're going to be able to support families so much more effectively than we had before, where those people who didn't have the means maybe did end up in environments that didn't support them as much with their learning and the whole family. So I think there's a positive that will come out of it, but I don't think it's been thought through in detail yet.
And I think if I can just add, Anne, I think it's also a bit, we have our, our country is built of provinces, and we have our division of powers between our federal and provincial government. And not only would perhaps you know, you've said maybe they didn't think about this. They also might not have line of sight to some of these things, because at the end of the day, you know, what's happening in an early year center in terms of parent support, that would not be necessarily on the radar screen of the federal government because it's provincially funded. But on the skills development side, the federal government does have quite a bit of responsibility for adult skills development. So, you know, you might be able to see a pairing of these two subject matters that were a little bit separated before, by one being the responsibility of the province and the other being primarily the responsibility at the federal level. So there might be yet more silver linings coming out of this. Going to go to Melissa next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure how relevant this question is. I think it goes to Anne. It's part question and part comment. I was wondering about the retention of the early childhood educator, and if there is perhaps through the system a way to make them see it as a very long-term commitment. And on that note, because a lot of these are single parent families, not a lot, or a lot of, well, a large population in Canada is single parent families, right? Has there ever been a concerted effort to recruit male early childhood educators? And I say that because my own daughter had two fantastic kindergarten teachers for 2 years, and they were two gentlemen at Jesse Ketchum. And also she was basically raised by her father, her young years. And I think it's perhaps a way of creating that male role model for a lot of children who perhaps wouldn't have exposure to that on a daily basis. Just your thoughts.
Thanks, Melissa. I'll address the retention of early childhood educators in their roles or whatever, because it hasn't traditionally been the highest paying field. But again, in speaking to our folks, because of the lab schools that we have and the fact that we have about 150 staff who work in those 12 centers, we have amazing retention of those people. And that's because we have a high quality environment where, number one, we pay them above the average in terms of, if you read the budget, I think it said in there that the average is about $19 or something like that an hour for people who work in early childhood education. Some, of course, get paid the minimum wage. Others get paid a bit more, perhaps. But if you start them off at a good wage and you have good benefits, which they do because they're employees of the college, they have professional development opportunities that we're always offering. We have amazingly low turnover of staff. So it does show you that if you create that environment, and they do have to, we do have to think about what these early childhood educators get paid, because that is a key to ensuring that they can earn a good living. Your comment or your question, or ask me a comment about the male versus female. We still do have predominantly female enrollment in our programs. And I know we have had male students as well. I think it's the same problem situation in terms of demographic profile for teachers in the early years, be that kindergarten through grade 2 or 3. I think they still end up being a predominantly female population. I think anything that we can do as a society to continue to promote this, because they are great role models. I think you're right in saying that if a young person has a great role model as a teacher in a early learning environment or in their early grades of school, I think those are very influential role models for them to see. So I think it would be wonderful if we could attract more, but that has to be sort of a societal drive to show the value, to show the benefit. And once it's supported more universally because of the government funding, I think that will also elevate the opportunities for people to see this as a career choice. Now, I know Patricia Chorney-Rubin, who she'll be mad at me for calling on her, But I wondered if she could comment on the male-female split between the students who enroll in our ECE programs. Patricia, would you be willing to do that if you're still there?
Hi, folks. Just as Anne has said, that our students are primarily women. We have seen an increase. We're probably at about 10% now. I'm just sort of ballparking that. And we have seen a small increase in staff in terms of who then gets hired in our centers. And we have two managers who are male managers. And I think there's just the feminist in me will say, as the salaries get better, men will come. Right. I think that is fundamentally what happens. If we look to see what happened in the case of healthcare, and the traditional nurse was always female, and I know we see an increased number of men who go into nursing as salaries and status improve. As they say, build it and they will come. We'll provide a better working environment and men will come. And I do agree, though, that this will be part of a larger social campaign. But I do see more men in the future for early childhood.
Thanks, Patricia. Great. Lola, you had a question.
This is a question for Anne. I'm sure that now that this has happened, more and more people are going to want to get into the early childhood field. And I'm thinking about the capacity to train them. So does George Brown, and I don't know who else trains early childhood people, but do you have the capacity to expand your enrollment, or are they going to have to develop new centers, and who's going to take that responsibility?
Thanks, Lola. Nice to see you, by the way. We have, as I said, about 1,000 students that we train. And in fact, every college, publicly funded college in Ontario has an early childhood education program. Most of them are diploma programs, some apprenticeships, and we do have, I think, about 4 degree programs now. And some of the universities, of course, offer early childhood education degrees as well. We do have the ability to expand. We'll need to take more space to do it. Patricia and I also had this conversation earlier today. And if there's a demand in the in the workforce, we're willing to step up to provide more supply. And we have the means to do that. In fact, I'd like to continue. We have 12 of the early learning centers now. We have the lab schools, as we call them. We're going to be opening a 13th. Where most colleges have closed theirs. And I think government or when government looks at this, they should also look at how they can support those centers more effectively, because that's also a rich environment to learn a lot of things. And when we were talking earlier about sort of how we're going to operationalize this and move this forward, we did learn a lot from when we introduced all-day kindergarten and everything. And there's a wealth of knowledge that we'll be able to take and ensure that this can roll out more smoothly. But bottom line, yes, we do have the capacity to increase the enrollment. And we'll have to make some changes to do so, but we're willing to do so, especially when there's going to be, we know, a demand for qualified early childhood educators.
I see that there's a question in the chat that's looking for an understanding of the differential salary between teachers and ECEs. And I just wanted to, I don't know that this is 100% accurate, but I just did a quick search and it is a big gap. So an average ECE in Ontario, because I know that's where most of you are, would be at best about $40,000, and average teacher salary would be hitting up much closer to $100,000. So it is a big differential between ECEs and teachers. And does that ring true to you, those numbers?
Yeah, Laurel, just in terms of where we start them, because we the ones we hire, it's about $30 an hour, and we go to a little over 36. So we're about maybe 68,000 on the top end. So yeah, a teacher might have an opportunity to earn a little bit more. But we have a good solid base in terms of what, but in the budget, it said the average is $19 an hour. And I had done some searches as well. And there's quite a few centers that would pay minimum wage. So there's quite a wide variation.
Which I think is even, again, one of the reasons why this is going to be bilateral province with each province, because each province has a different circumstance. Each province has currently a different early childhood learning and childcare setup. Some have all day kindergarten, some don't. So there's going to be a lot of moving pieces to really look at how many education systems, how many school boards do they have? How many school systems do they have? Ontario has, 4. Some other provinces have 2, some have 1. So there's going to be a lot of pieces that need to pull together over the next many months. Jackie, I think last audience question to you, and then we will go do a little bit of wrap up and last conversation.
Hi, everyone. I am a teacher educator at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. My area of expertise is primary junior education. We get many early childhood educators who have a degree from any of the universities coming in. And I would have to say, I've been at OISE for 20 years, and I would say that the early childhood educators bring such a wealth of information because of their expertise in early childhood. And they really understand the trajectory of child development. So it's a real blessing. And I love that we get those students as part of our candidates. The difference between the salaries is enormous. Because it is true that a teacher can make upwards of $90,000 after 10 years and various coursework, et cetera, whereas an early childhood educator, if they stay in that domain, are not going to make anywhere near that. So I'm really happy to hear about the, hopefully that people will start to address this issue, because it is one of total inequity. And it manifests itself in kindergarten. You see it very often. So because we have full day kindergarten in Ontario, we have a qualified teacher and a qualified ECE present in the classroom. And the one thing that has challenged me ever since that came to fruition, I love the presence of the ECE. So I'll just back up and say part of my job is to go in and into classrooms and supervise my teacher candidates. So I'm in and out of classrooms all the time. And what I observe is when the ECE teacher connection works, it is phenomenal. It's very well-rehearsed dance that happens, and everybody is on the same page. The kids are benefiting, but there's also a large number of inequities where the teacher either sees themselves as the owner of the classroom, if you will, or the teacher, and in their minds, they are more qualified, or they are the leaders of the classroom. And the ECE can be often treated as a second-class citizen. And that is such a dangerous dynamic. So I guess my question, and I sort of want to piggyback a little bit off Diane talking about parent involvement. I feel a really strong need for there to be dialogue between the school boards, the faculties of education, and the early childhood programs, so that we can work that through, because it's not a healthy situation for the teacher, the ECE, and it's definitely not a healthy situation for the kids, because the kids are watching all the time. They see everything that's happening, and they understand when there's a dynamic that's not a healthy one. So I'm wondering, and I guess maybe this is a question for Anne, I'm just wondering if there is any sort of movement towards looking at that kind of thing, because many ECEs, as I said, will go to the university to become teachers, because they see that as I think being more valued in their work because of the pay difference and the way often that they are treated. And I think my big concern with the province of Ontario is, despite the pandemic and the the stress that the teachers are under, I know many teachers have left or they're on leaves of absence. At the same time, we're being told that billions of dollars are going to be cut from education, which is going to really impact what happens in schools. So I don't know, that's a
Thanks, Jackie.
question, but
Thanks. I think that I go to Margie on this one, actually, because I really believe that the issue that you raise is one that, we need the 2 skills in our FDK and our full day kindergarten class. I was part of the government that made that choice to put a teacher and ECE together. And you're absolutely right. When it works, and I mostly saw it work, I probably wouldn't have been in classrooms where it wasn't working. It's fantastic. When we roll, as Margie's been working on for years and years, childcare and early learning into our more public system, I hope, Margie, that we see, and I'm sure that's what you want to see, is an empowerment and an elevation of the skills of the ECE to a level of importance where we start to redress issues like the one that Jackie's talked about.
When we grapple with the extreme importance of these early years to our social and economic future, every bit as important as the primary, secondary, post-secondary students. Therefore, and since we believe that the system has to be high quality and the workforce has to be high quality and has to be well educated, it is a given that the provinces, the whole system is going to have to come to terms with the fact they have to be paid accordingly. And that will immediately begin to elevate the status. That is a work in progress, and governments are going to have to choke. They'll join the union. They will get all the benefits. It has to happen. And those inequities, I know they do exist, and you can see it, how it happens. However, it's something that's going to have to be leveled out, and it has to be equated with the importance of the age and stage and the workforce.
Laurel, can I add something to that?
Sure,
Jackie,
sure.
Jackie, I don't know if you're aware of the Summer Institute that we host at George Brown in partnership with OISE every year. I think what you talked about would be a very good subject for a future Summer Institute. The subject for this one, which is at the end of May, I think, is already set. And it's going to be related to learnings of the pandemic. But I think that would be, and again, Patricia will just love me for all these wonderful, brave new suggestions. But I think that would be something worth exploring. And I'll encourage maybe Patricia or someone from her team to get in touch with you, maybe to talk that through, because I think that would be worthy of some further work and dialogue.
amazing.
Something is going to have to go to the cabinet. Has to go to cabinet tables, Jackie.
Sorry?
It's a discussion that's going to have to take place at cabinet tables.
Yeah.
As to how it's going to roll out. Okay, so I
Thank
said
you.
we had no more questions, but now Karina has her hand up. Here's the rule, Karina. Got to be a quick question, because then I just got sent one from Martha, and I want to get everybody's questions answered, and we need to wrap up.
Okay, I did put it in the chat as well because I thought we would
Okay.
run out of time, but I'm looking at, as we work towards this over the next 5 years, wondering how do you see this impacting the role of early childhood educators in the early on childhood family centers, if at all?
Margie, you are championed the early childhood, the early years centers. That was
The
part.
early on.
So how do you see this new model living with the early years still in existence or not? Margie, have you thought about that?
That's a very provincial thing, isn't it? That's an Ontario model.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we have them, I guess, in PEI as well.
Yeah, and I think
When
you
I
have a
talked about the
couple in Nova
migration,
Scotia. You have a couple in Nova Scotia too.
when I talked about the migration, eventually when the pay is better, it also demands better education, better training. But with, and the elevated status, the elevated benefits, the elevated pay, elevated respect, the migration into the public system is going to eventually happen. It's a work in progress, but it'll happen.
And I guess I would also say, just like all day kindergarten, I don't suspect any province, Corina, will make it mandatory. So you still will have families that may choose to keep a young child at home. use the early years center for different programming and services. Right now, as an example, we had speech therapy running in the early years or out of, say, an early years center. We also had it running out of schools. So there's going to be some efficiencies that can be found, but when you don't have it be a requirement, you're still going to have to offer services in community as well. So again, there's work to be done, and it won't be a one size fits all. It's not going to be the same, exact same in every community, because families will make their choice. The last question is one about children with special needs. And I did pull the notes out of the budget that said to make immediate progress for children with disabilities, budget 2021 proposes to provide $29.2 million over 2 years, starting in 21-22, so that's come this year, to Employment and Social Development Canada through Enabling Accessibility Fund to support childcare centers as they improve their physical accessibility. The funding, which could benefit over 400 childcare centers, would support improvements such as the construction of ramps, accessible doors, washrooms, and play structures. So that is specifically in the federal government's announcement about this. So Margaret, we said we were celebrating. And we are, but we're celebrating without rose-colored glasses on, because we know there's still a lot of work to do. So Anne, I'm going to come to you first, have you give a couple of last words, because Mary made me promise I would wrap things up in an hour. And then to you, Margaret, and I'll just say a couple of closing words and we'll go back to Mary, and we will conclude tonight.
Well, thanks very much. I'm very pleased to have been part of this dialogue. I'm so pleased that our government is moving forward. I think we need everyone to be advocates for this. So hopefully you all know a little bit more than you did before, and you're going to be willing to speak up and advocate, because the provincial government will have a key role to play, and so that we're going to all have to work hard to make sure things unfold as they should, because this is just the right thing to do. And so when you create this environment with quality, high quality learning opportunities for young people, it's going to make a difference. I just have great hope then for what our future will bring. And I'm just looking forward for seeing tangible rollout over the next 5 years, but we all have to be a part of advocating to make sure that that happens.
Great. Thanks, Anne. Margaret.
Okay, so my wind up is going to be the dream that I have expressed quite frequently recently, and I was really interested that I see it in a 5-year time frame, and I was interested to hear the Minister of Finance express the same time frame. 5 years, we're going to see this happen. So my dream is that within 5 years, every child across Canada, from coast to coast to coast, will have access to early learning and care, available, accessible, affordable, and hopefully linked to public education in each province, in each territory. And that by that time, at that time, it will be considered a right, not a privilege. Just as maternity, paternity leave is now, just as universal health care is now, that this will be considered part of our education system. It extends down to 2-year-olds, maybe 18-month-old babies, and it is considered a right, not a privilege. And that's my dream. And I was interested to hear the Minister of Finance use the same time frame. So there's the commitment from government to be there to make sure it happens.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for your leadership on this. It's an important dream, and it's nice to see that dream come to fruition. I think all of us who have had any connectivity to our public education system know that it is a great equalizer, and it is a great conduit to support families, whether English is not their first language, whether they are of lower income, and we need to support those children. This is a way to get that support, that universality even earlier. It's a way for us to track these kids. Once you start school, you get a number, and then we know what's happening to you long term. And that will help us, I think, create a really strong track record and base of evidence of why this is so important for our country. If anybody ever wants to take it away after 5 years, we'll dig out that data and make sure that that doesn't happen. So back to you, Mary. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you for inviting me to be part of it. And thank you to Anne and Margaret for the conversation this evening. I'll kick it back to you, Mary.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Anne, Margie. And I'm sitting here listening to this, and Margie, your dream looks achievable. How often does the give exceed the ask to the extent this has? $30 billion is a pretty big number. And the most important thing about all of this is apart from the children, it's getting women back to work, and the economic benefits to this country are enormous as a result of all of this. So congratulations to you, Margie, to Laurel, to Anne. You're the people who are making this work. And thank you to all of our members who are here listening and taking this word out to our communities. So it's been a wonderful evening hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Anne. Laurel.
Thank you, Margie, and nice to see so many of you. And thank you, Mary, for having the Verity Club care about this important issue and get all these women who are on the line tonight ready to help us push this forward.
Thank
you,
you.
Margie.
Night.
Bye, everyone.
Night.
Good night, everyone.
Keep well. Stay safe.
You too.